mercenaries lost their lives. But while these two defeats are well known, there are plenty of other examples too. At 105 BC, at Arosio in what is now southeastern France, 120,000 Romans did battle with 200,000 warriors of the Cimbri and Teuton groups. It was a disaster. Some sources say that all 120,000 of the Romans were wiped out. This is almost certainly not true, but it was definitely a heavy defeat. The abject humiliation of Arosio led to a full restructuring of the military. In 53 BC, Parthian troops killed 20,000 Romans at Carrhae in southeastern Turkey. Among the dead were the leading Republican statesman Marcus Licinius Crassus. Another catastrophe for Rome. In fact, there were plenty of these catastrophes, from defeat by the Gauls at the Battle of Allia in 387 BC to the massacre by the Goths and the Alans at the Adrianople in 378 AD. Roman history is littered with evidence of bloody routs and humiliating pastings. Even Rome itself wasn't safe. Between 390 BC and 472 AD, the Eternal City was sacked 4 times, first by the Gauls, then by the Visigoths, next by the Vandals, and finally by a rebel force led by General Ricimer. So, yeah, if you were a Roman soldier, you were part of the best fighting forces in the world, but don't get complacent. This didn't mean you couldn't get slaughtered. Where possible, Roman soldiers tried to avoid getting slaughtered, and to achieve this, they relied on teamwork. Roman armies were not really about daring individuals, issuing challenges and engaging in single combat, nor were they about unstructured advances and chaotic charges. Instead, they were about the collective. They were about discipline, efficiency, and cooperation. And this meant you weren't just relying on your own skill and nerve, you were relying on the skill and nerve of your mates too. This mutual reliance was built into Roman tactics and strategies, like the testudo. The testudo is also known as the tortoise, and it's one of the most enduring images of Roman warfare. This was the famous shield wall formation designed to offer effective protection against enemy weaponry. Soldiers at the edges of the formation held their scuta shields outwards, protecting the unit from all sides, whilst soldiers in the middle would raise their own shields above their heads to close the lid of the formation. This meant it was absolutely critical that every man was doing his job, and doing it well. If they didn't, you were all going to be slaughtered. This happened at Carrhae in 53 BC, when Serena's Parthian horse archers appeared. The Romans arranged themselves into tortoise formations, but apparently these formations did not do the job. Some accounts describe how Parthian arrows struck exposed limbs through the gaps in the shield wall, causing the formation to fall apart. Other accounts suggest it was the shields themselves that failed. Some arrows were said to have struck the feet of Roman soldiers, pinning them to the ground. Later in the battle, the Parthians charged the Roman shield walls. The much more manoeuvrable Parthians were able to harry and disturb the testudo, and in time, the Roman nerve began to falter. As tactical cohesion broke down, the shield walls broke down too, and this meant the soft underbelly of the formation, you, were exposed. The resulting slaughter was horrifying. At least 20,000 Romans died at Carrhae. In comparison, Serena lost relatively few of his own men. Of course, in other instances, the testudo certainly did work. The Romans wouldn't have used it if it wasn't generally effective. At the siege of Heracleum in 169 BC, the Romans deployed their tortoise formation with huge success against the Macedonians. By using the testudo in this innovative way, the legions successfully overcame the defences. The historian Livy tells us of 2 companies of soldiers. The first company used their testudo to form a ramp at the base wall, and then the second company climbed up this ramp from the rear. When the soldiers who were mounted on the ramp came close to the wall, they were at the same height as the defenders. When these defenders were driven off, the soldiers of 2 companies climbed over into the city. The Macedonian siege works were overcome, and Heracleum was captured. This sounds like an impressive feat, although you could argue it another way. You could argue that if your walls can be breached by one group of soldiers standing on top of another, then they probably weren't very effective anyway. Despite the apparently pathetic fortifications, though, this tactic is still a good example of Roman training and coordination at work. A manoeuvre like this simply wouldn't be possible without a rigorous program of drilling and conditioning, which took an enormous toll on the soldiers themselves. At the basic level, training meant lots of running and marching, often in full kit. This was crucial as long-range manoeuvrability and mobility were big parts of Roman warfare. That's why they built so many roads everywhere. But while roads certainly made things easier, you're still looking at